We're gonna do a 400 speed black and white film, 40mm rangefinder shootout. I am shooting this because I have not been able to find a really solid, comprehensive guide regarding 400 speed black and white film online, certainly not on YouTube. As kind of a newer film photographer, I don't really know what film I like the best. I've certainly shot with most of the ones I'll show you, but I still don't have a great grasp of what I'm gonna get with each one and which one that I'm drawn to. So as much as anything, this is a self-discovery video, but I'm hoping that it will also help others who are also trying to determine what film's gonna work for them. Now I do know that my favorite film to shoot with, in ideal circumstances, situations, is Acros 100. But 100 speed Acros is not going to cut it for most of the shooting that I do. I'm usually in lower light. I sure wish Fuji still made their Neopan 400, but since they don't, I really struggling to find a film that I'm happy with in the 400 range. So I honestly don't know what film I like the best at this point. I know that I shoot mostly street and candids when I'm with my family. I'm not doing fine art photography, and I'm certainly not getting paid for the film work that I'm doing. But I don't necessarily want the cheapest stuff out there either. I would like a film that matches my style, that's flexible in various lighting situations and scenarios, and which scans well. So at first I was shooting like this to try to save time. I shot with 3 rangefinders and my Fuji X-T2. The X-T2 acted as a light meter and a distance meter, which helps with these rangefinders. But after just a few rolls, I realized that the cameras were getting too different of results. The shutter speeds were off, and that's not going to work for a film comparison, obviously. So because I'd already gotten some with the Canonette G3, I elected just to continue shooting with that one only. So with that, I'm going to give you a brief summary of all 9 film types that I've been able to find on B&H that are currently available for sale in the US. If there are other films that I've missed, let me know in the comments, but those are the only ones that seem readily available to me at this time. We'll start with the oldest and arguably the most beloved black and white film, Kodak Tri-X. Introduced in 1940, to this day, Tri-X remains the world's best-selling black and white film. And when photographers combined its high speed with the small 35mm form factor, it revolutionized photojournalism. It was used by most photojournalists for over 3 decades. Tri-X has undergone a number of minor engineering changes during its long history. The modern version has smaller grain than the original, but it's known for its unique grain characteristics, and it is the reason that many prefer film to digital. Tri-X is also known for its deep contrast. It's a forgiving film, it's accurate, consistent, has good tonal range, and scans well and sharp. Kentmere is owned by Harman, which also creates the Ilford films. Kentmere represents Harman's budget or student film. Kentmere is a plastic-based film known for being soft, and it scratches easily as a result. Be careful when squeegeeing this stuff. It has very fine grain, it is sharp, and has broad tonal range and latitude. Many claim that Kentmere is inconsistent with clumpy grain. It's said to have lower quality standards than its Ilford cousins. But the upside for those like me who scan their film is that it dries flat, and it is very inexpensive. This is Fomapan, which is also Arista EDU Ultra, which is also Holga. Did they think we wouldn't notice that it's all the same? All of these films are created by Czech company Freestyle. I guess they thought Arista EDU Ultra would sell better for film students in the US, and I guess that they thought hipsters who shoot Holga would prefer to buy film with the name of their camera on it. I don't know. This is a blue base film. The image quality, grain structure, contrast, and spectral sensitivity seem to be suited for Holga cameras. You get a lot of halation with this film. which lends itself to those who enjoy that glowing, surrealist effect that you can obtain with the Holga or the toy camera market. The base is thin on Fomapan, so curling can be a problem for scanning. It can also be brittle, scratch easy. It's also not great for pushing, but it is a cheap film. Agfa APX is known for being milky, faded, or having low contrast tonally. It does retain highlights well, but it's also known for being unforgiving. Most agree that it's more like 200 speed and not as sensitive as Agfa claim. This film does dry flat, so it should be good for scanning. HP5 is known as a medium contrast film. It has good shadow detail and well-separated midtones with sharp grain. It might be less sharp than some films, but it will provide predictable results. As a side note, I've found HP5 Plus fans to be some of the most loyal and enthusiastic in the community, more so than perhaps any of the other films that I'm talking about today. Rollei RPX is the successor of the old Agfa APX, if that's not confusing. It's known for its high dynamic range and holding details in the shadow. Allegedly, this film was designed to be pushed. While it was introduced as a low-cost film 7 years ago or so, the price is currently very high. This is most likely due to limited supply, probably not as much to do with quality, as many compare this film to Kentmere. It makes me wonder how much longer it will be around. Rollei Retro 400S. This is characterized by high contrast and tightly packed grain. It has extended infrared sensitivity, so foliage, greenery is going to get a shade lighter than other films will provide. The red dye comes from the anti-halation layer as well. Most shooters of this film agree it shoots much better at 200 ASA rather than 400. But as it's marked as a 400 speed, and this is a 400 speed comparison video, we won't be adjusting. Let's end on the T-Grain films. I'm not going to go into great depth, as you can read better and smarter reviews than I would be able to give you about the science behind it. I'll just say that T-Grain film is uniform in its grain characteristics. The grain is usually less noticeable and it's more predictable. T-Grain is often compared to digital. It's preferred by those who don't like the grainy characteristics of most film. T-Max is very linear tonally. It has very fine grain, the T-grain emulsion as I mentioned, high sharpness and very high edge detail. T-Max is a great choice if you don't like grain. The T-Max base has a pink tint to it. This is the anti-halation layer, which is why it's a dead giveaway that Lady Gray is actually rebranded T-Max, as it does have that pink tinted anti-halation layer. Delta 400 is very comparable to T-Max. Like T-Max, it is characterized by high sharpness, T-grain characteristics, wide latitude, and linear tonality. So this is my film scanning setup. It's a light box from Amazon. It was pretty cheap, by D-Meyer, D-B-M-I-E-R. And then my XT2 with a 60mm macro lens. And then I'm just pushing the film flat with some batteries. As an important note, I developed all of this film using D-76, and I used the values provided by the massive dev chart just for consistency and for reproducibility. Granted, I realize some of these films are going to react drastically different in other developers, and maybe even using different types of development processes like semi-stand or whatnot. But I wanted to start at a pretty common baseline. For me, D-76 is what I know and have used, and the massive dev chart is kind consistent, at least among the different films and who curates that list. And now that the film is developed and scanned, I'd like to present a bit of a blind test, comparison test, if you will. So what I've done is I've assigned an arbitrary letter to each film type, and I will show you these films along with the letter and not tell you the name of the film. That way, if you're interested in doing this, you can just jot a score down on each film with each quality that you find important as we go through them. And at the end, you can tally that all up, and it might be interesting to inform your own discovery process. If you're a long-time film shooter and don't feel like you need this sort of exercise, maybe for you it might be more interesting to see if you were able to figure out which film is which. Make a game out of it. It's a challenge. Or, skip it entirely. Now, it certainly helped me to try to do this in a blind test. Now, I couldn't be completely blind because I was creating it for myself. On the other hand, I was able to get lost a little bit in the film and forget the branding to a large degree. And that was helpful because I know I came into this with a lot of brand bias, probably even more than I realized after I looked at the results and was you get that little bit of loyalty being questioned, or a little bit of your everything you thought was true is no longer true type of thing. I went through a little bit of that, a little bit of a spiritual crisis when it comes to film. I think that's a good thing. So I'm glad I did it this way, and I'll share with you at the end my own results. So we'll start with the correctly exposed high contrast shot. As I looked at these, I rated them based on their tonality and the dynamic range. Now I'm going to take that same shot and I'm going to zoom in on each film type so that you can look more closely at the grain. I've also increased the contrast because I usually do that anyway. It will help me to determine the grain structure and what it might look like if I increase the contrast. So I apologize if you're not into increasing the contrast, but at least you'll be able to see the differences in the grain more starkly. With this next shot, it's a little less contrasty, but I tried to underexpose this shot on purpose to see how well the shadows might be recovered. Now, I got very inconsistent results here, with many of these scans appearing pretty muted, and my hunch here is that this is just how different film reacts to being underdeveloped when underexposed, or at least I hope that's why, but I'm not totally sure. But either way, what it might help determine is which film responds better or worse to being recovered after scanning, which I will look at a little later. But here I'm just going to show you the straight out of camera underexposed appearance of the film. This is the last shot I got, and this was taken in the afternoon in full sun, only a few clouds. I also purposefully overexposed this, again, because I want to see how well the highlights can be recovered after scanning. And as I mentioned before, I will show you that in a minute. So now that we've looked at a bunch of those results straight out of camera, straight off the scanner, what I'd like to do is show you what I normally do in post to these. And for me, that is to drastically increase the contrast. Now, not every photographer is going to want to do this. There are plenty of photographers who prefer films that give them a wide mid-tone, and they'll kind of leave it there. Kind of quintessential HP5 look. That's not me though. I prefer a lot of strong contrast, so I'm almost always going to do this. What I'll typically do is I will drag the white point up until I start to blow the highlights, start to lose data, and then I'll do that the same for the black point. I'll just hold the Alt key down as I drag the slider, and then that will help me to see when I start to lose data, and that's where I'll stop. Now, if you're not into this high contrast look, that's fine. I'd still encourage you to look at the results, as it will show you how well the various scans do at holding together when recovering the highlights or the shadows. So I'm going to share with you now my own preferences and my own scores as I've gone through this blind test. As I do that, though, I hope that you won't take it personally if I happen to dislike a film that you love. For some reason, every time I do this, people tend to take it personally and get a little upset and uptight. It's just my preferences, and you might have different preferences. And that is so awesome. I'm so glad that we have different preferences. It's a big world. There are a lot of photographers. If all of them had the same gear, loved the same film, loved the same style, did everything exactly the same, this world would suck. So I really am happy that you have a different opinion than me, and I encourage you to explore your own creative differences so that I can flourish in my own space, my own little corner of the universe where Andy has his own style. So that's the best for all of us, but don't take it personally if I don't like your film. Anyway, here are the results for me, and these were super surprising for me. So just going down the list top to bottom, not going to read it to you, but Rollei Retro wins for me. Fomapan was the worst for me. And that's interesting. There's lots of things that are interesting here. One of the surprises was the Rollei Retro. Before I knew what I was looking at, I was just really blown away by the awesome contrast just right out the gate. I have a hunch or a feeling, again, I'm not an expert, but I have a feeling that there might be so much exposure just right out of camera on this because maybe it's better rated at a 200 ASA and it's being treated as if it was pushed, maybe. And so we get a little bit more contrast out of it. And that might not be good for some photographers who prefer that linear mid-tonality that you're just not going to get with this film. I did wonder if when I increased the white point and decreased the dark point, if I would find another film that actually looked better at high contrast than the Retro. It turns out that's not the case. Even after I applied that effect, I still prefer the Rollei Retro, apparently, in this test. So that was really surprising to me. I guess it shouldn't be a surprise that most of my top picks were expensive. but I was bummed. I was really hoping that one of the cheap films that I would find to be interesting to me, but they weren't. And just because I mentioned cost, I will show you the cost breakdown on these films as it stands right now, which is the very end of 2016 into the beginning of 2017. I'll show you these costs in US dollars. I'm also going to show them per frame because not all of these rolls come with the same exposure amount. So per exposure, the cheapest film, for instance, here is actually Tri-X right now, which if you're a Tri-X fan, it's probably a good time to stock up on that stuff. Whereas the most expensive is the Rollei RPX. And as I mentioned before, I think that's just because of the fact that there's less around. This is the rumors I've heard anyway, that they might be making less of it, which might also be the case with Rollei Retro, which makes me nervous since it's my new favorite film, apparently. But shooting RPX is going to cost 25 cents per frame. The good news is that if you like T-Max, or if you're like me and just discovered that it's your second favorite film, apparently, that it will come in a lot cheaper if you buy it in Lady Gray form, which again, Lady Gray is T-Max rebadged. But it will come in packs of 3, which probably is why it can be sold at a little cheaper of a price. But it will come in at just 16.5 cents per shot, the Lady Gray format, which will save you 4 cents a shot over T-Max in the Kodak package. The other thing in regards to Tri-X and T-Max that was surprising to me was that I really thought that I would prefer Tri-X, as it's commonly known for its strong contrast and more edgy grain, which are both things I like in a film. And on the other hand, T-Max is known for its more consistent, finer, not as noticeable grain, and which isn't as contrasty. And to me, that's a turnoff. In fact, I've always wondered why T-Max or Delta shooters don't just shoot digital all the time, because I've always heard that, that's the film that most resembles digital. But what I learned is that when you increase the contrast like I do, what happens is that grain with its consistency becomes more noticeable, but it also has a very pleasant sweep to it in my mind. Additionally, it holds together when it's increased the contrast a lot more than Tri-X does. Tri-X just starts to fall apart, at least in this one test that I've done. Another surprise is that I guess I really hate Fomapan. Maybe it was a bad batch, and I don't want to discount that because this is just one film. Again, this isn't super scientific. I'm going to have to try this again and do more follow-up tests, but my initial reaction to that batch of Fomapan was bleh. And Kentmere scratched a lot, and I knew that would happen. I heard that would happen, especially for someone like me who's not super gentle with his film. That's just not going to cut it. If you are gentle with your film and you liked the look of Kentmere, that may be a good choice because it's so cheap, but for me that was just not going to work. Well, that was a lot of fun. It was also a lot of work, but I'm glad I did it. I really was pleased with the outcome for me personally. It's exciting and surprising. As mentioned before, this is not super scientific, so I hope that you'll only use it as a little bit of a point of departure, maybe some anecdotal data to help you on your own journey of discovery. But I do genuinely hope that you found it helpful or interesting or a sleep aid. I do plan to do this again with other types of film, maybe color, maybe different speeds of black and white. So if you found it interesting, you might subscribe so that you'll see those. Either way, I would love to hear your suggestions on how to improve the process for next time. What can I do better? What will help to better gauge the strengths and weaknesses of different films? That's super interesting stuff to me. How can I up the production value? So if you have those suggestions, I would love to hear them, especially if you're able to present those in a kind way and not be mean. That would be super appreciated. Anyway, well, this has been fun. I hope to talk to you. I never know how to end, so I'm just going to put the lens cap on.